Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video 157, Keeping Occult Secrets versus Mass Magic, which is a term that I use for sort of the democratization of the occult that we've seen in the wake of social media especially. It doesn't begin there, but it does begin to be more prevalent there. Links in the description to my two literary blogs, by the way. If you're interested in the occult, most of the texts that I've ever written or edited are on occult topics of some form or another, whether it be the more ancient side, sort of the antiquated philosophy and religion, dogma, through alchemy, sort of the Renaissance magic, up until the late pre-modern period with the Victorian movements that we see within the spiritual realm. Now, I think that there are two basic categories of magic when we're talking about this basic structure. One is the idea that is most, I hate to use the Boyd Rice line, but that is most powerful which remains unknown except unto you and to you alone, versus the potentially much more powerful use of mass magic. We see this happening, by the way, right now. We have individuals who call themselves witches. They call themselves sorceresses or occultists or whatever. Conducting weekly sort of magical rituals to try to bind Donald Trump. Now, if you look at the rituals they're using, it's New Age nonsense. It has nothing to do with any authentic witchcraft tradition. It certainly doesn't have anything to do with sorcery. But that being said, it's a form of mass magic in the psychological sense, I suppose, in their case. And there is something to be said for that. The side of psychology and propaganda and memetics rolled up generally into one does matter within an occult context. And it tends to be mass magic. It tends to be democratized. The internet has democratized as well literature on the occult realm as well. You can now find texts that even 10 years ago, you would never have found a copy of them. Some obscure fortune-telling text from the middle of the 1800s. You never would have known that it existed before. If you knew about it at all, it was referenced in some other work that in turn was referenced in some other work, and you had to do 6 months of digging to find it. You certainly wouldn't find it in PDF format. Now you can find basically anything. They're all there. That certainly enables my work because, of course, it allows me to access new materials, to release them in a true modern format. So people can get a physical copy. They don't just have to rely upon a PDF that disappears because their flash drive got peed on by their dog or something like that. Which would be a sad day. It'd be a really sad day if that happened. But then there's also very solitary individual magic. And there's something to be said for that. If a person has conducted substantial experimentation into the occult in one form or another, there are probably things that they're not willing to tell others. I'm very forthcoming about most of my occult views. Of course, I'm speaking about them right now. I'm very forthcoming in literary form when I write about herb lore, when I write about folklore or something like that. It's all there for public consumption. It's something I want others to be able to access that material. But there are also occult experiences or occult forces that you generally would not talk about. If a person were skilled at all, there would always be something that they're holding back because there's no reason to tell others. They wouldn't want others to potentially use that force against them. Herein lies a secondary problem, of course, where some group that ultimately is rather open, some gentlemen like the Masons or something, they're very open about their ritualism. It's not really hidden. They used to use Masonic shorthand, which of course confused people, and they thought, oh, they're talking in witch language or something like that. Ultimately, it was very open. But if you get a penchant for not being open about your occult beliefs, sometimes people assume that you've joined the Illuminati, you're conducting evil rituals and sacrificing people. And this is a common trope. It takes off of Hollywood, really. It has to do more with the silver screen and misconceptions about occultists that come from that period. We're talking about certainly the 60s through the 1980s. And older than that, with the opinions written by various Protestants, including King James himself, with demonology and some of these other manuscripts that he wrote. And that sort of informs witch hunting, it informs people's opinions about magic, which were never truly authentic. It isn't until the late 1800s, really, with the resurgence of true literacy in the middle class populations of the world, that you get a bunch of sort of folk materials that are easily attainable. And it isn't until later with electricity that you get them mass produced. It isn't until the Victorian era that things really begin to take off in this world. Before that, in between the period of antiquity with the spiritual cycles and rituals then, and certainly through the Dark Ages, up until that time, it's a period of spiritual unenlightenment. It's a period in which the lay people are expected to be commanded and not have any real spiritual validity of their own. They're told what to believe. They're told what to do in their rituals. And so I would argue that that mostly is spiritually dead. But any time that you have a church service, you are conducting mass magic. If you have a group of Christians praying together for somebody to get better, cast out this demon, please, bless us, Lord, or something like that, it's a form of mass magic. They are performing an invocation of their God, and they're doing it in a ritual setting together. They're doing it in a communal sense. You would also think of someone who's simply pious and religious praying on their own. That would be more individualistic. And if they had certain spiritual experiences through that they would think others would find them odd for, or that they considered particularly effectual, and that they didn't wish to talk about, it would be a very individual pursuit. And I think there's a place within the occult for both of these. Certainly, you don't have to limit yourself to just one. I talk about memetics, I talk about the use and deployment of propaganda in a spiritual sense quite often, and I employ these means. I do that for good, I hope people would agree, good purposes, because I'm a libertarian. I want people to be free and left alone and not abuse one another. Others for less benevolent motives, perhaps. But I also do my own thing in privacy, and just because I like people, or I say, well, these are my subscribers, or these are people, ultimately, if they're interested in my content, we'd probably get along in a real-world scenario, at least to some extent, at least on some issues. That doesn't mean that I open up about absolutely everything. There will always be a little bit that's held back. It's like if somebody were performing various rituals and writing a grimoire. They may choose not to release it. They may, but they might redact a little bit. They might leave a little bit of it out. This would be too spooky for the public, essentially. And I think that's the right of someone who's practicing in any spiritual form. There are experiences that you should keep to yourself for various purposes. That's about all. Peace out.